After a bone-rattling 15-hour train journey, Luo Cheng finally laid eyes on his new capital. It was a breathtaking marvel, an imperial dream of classical architecture built upon a secret skeleton of steel-reinforced concrete. He envisioned a future of shiny asphalt roads for bicycles and grand halls with glass curtain walls. But this inspection was cut short by an urgent message that changed everything. 30,000 bolt-action rifles were ready. In an instant, the architect became the supreme commander. The age of cold weapons was declared dead. His plan was brutally efficient: rearm the entire military, downsize the ranks, and turn seasoned veterans into a new industrial workforce. Those who could shoot would become sharpshooters. Those who couldn't would build the nation. Even the cavalry was being reborn as dragoons, trading lances for shotguns and semi-automatic carbines. But when faced with the impossible logistics of supporting a million-person metropolis, Luo Cheng unveiled his true genius. His solution was a whirlwind of mechanized farms and a cold, ruthless plan to solve his manpower crisis by simply purchasing an entire primitive tribe. The great machine of the Han Empire began to turn. Yu Fu and Yang Xin, carrying hissing carbide lamps, led several craftsmen to seal the newly excavated cave opening with the rubble and yellow mud from the day's work. They left only 2 small holes, one for observation and one for ventilation. Light it up, Yu Fu commanded. From now on, work in 3 shifts. Keep feeding firewood in there like you're firing a kiln. I want that cave red hot. They were about to use the ancient method of cracking mountains and splitting stone, the very technique their ancestors used to build the Dujianjian irrigation system in antiquity: fire setting and water quenching. The Han tribe's technology was vastly more advanced than that of their ancestors. They saw no reason they should fail. A raging fire burned inside the sealed cave all through the night. At dawn the next day, just as the sky began to lighten, Yang Xian was already up. "How's it burning in there?" he shouted to the night shift crew. "Chief Engineer Yang. It's glowing red inside, like a steel furnace." "Good. Stop adding firewood and start fanning the flames. Boiler room, fire it up. Get the water pumps ready." Over an hour later, the sun was fully up. The steam engine chugged and puffed, driving a pump that drew bone-chilling mountain spring water from a nearby stream. "Everyone stand back." Yu Fu himself grabbed a thick rubber hose, gripped the nozzle to create a powerful jet, and sent a stream of water shooting through the observation hole in the earthen wall with a sharp hiss. Crack, crackle. The searing hot rock, at 1,000 degrees Celsius, met the icy spring water and immediately emitted a series of jarring cracks. A thick cloud of white steam billowed out from the opening, like the breath of a giant beast. Yu Fu waved the hose, dousing every corner of the cave with cold water. 10 minutes later, the white steam dissipated and the sounds ceased. Several crew members with steel pikes and pickaxes knocked down the earthen wall with a few resounding blows. However, the scene before them was a major disappointment. The cave walls were covered in a web of cracks, and some rubble had fallen, but the thunderous collapse they had anticipated simply did not happen. Unwilling to give up, Yu Fu snatched a steel pike, jammed the flat end into a crack in the rock, and pried with all his might. Thud! A rock the size of a basketball fell to the ground. "It's working." Yang Xian's eyes lit up. "Looks like it's all fractured inside. Don't use men to pry. It's dangerous. Get the rock drill." Rat-a-tee-tee-tee-tee-tee-tee. The rock drill's massive pneumatic hammer extended into the cave and hammered away at the cracked rock face. This time, the effect was spectacular. Rubble rained down, and in just a short while, the doorway-sized opening was expanded to the size of a room. But a problem immediately followed. The cracks created by the fire and water were only about a meter deep. Beyond that, it was solid rock again. To continue with this method, they would have to burn it for another night. Yu Fu and Yang Xian exchanged a look, and in each other's eyes, they saw the same weary realization. This was less efficient than just using the rock drill to brute force it, not to mention the waste of so much firewood and time. It seemed explosives were the only way. The two made a snap decision, abandoning the ancient fire setting and water quenching method, which sounded impressive but was ultimately useless. Until the explosives arrived, they would slowly chip away with the rock drill. Within a few short days, Luo Cheng's orders were being executed with high efficiency throughout the Han tribe's vast administrative machine. On the southern seas, several cargo ships carrying 2,500 newly minted railway engineers and 1,000 quarry workers arrived at the docks of Tuahai Prefecture. The quarry workers collected their equipment and supplies and immediately set off for Panjshir Prefecture without delay to begin quarrying the first batch of stone for the capital's construction. Although the railway was not yet complete, the stone could be quarried in advance. The moment the trains arrived, it could be loaded and shipped out. The 2,500 men of the once mighty Baotao Guard had, in the blink of an eye, a collective change of profession. Their swords and spears were stored away, replaced by shovels, as they transformed into a glorious corps of engineers. With a single order from me, this legion of roughnecks was deftly split into 3 groups. The first group, 1,000 strong, was to promptly board the ships, destination, Chungkong Prefecture. Once ashore, there was no time to rest. They were to transfer directly to a steam-belching train and head for Qian Prefecture to be integrated into the 1st Railway Construction Brigade as apprentices. The second group, another 1,000 men, had an even simpler task. They were to take a ferry across the river to the opposite bank, to Tangxing Prefecture. There, they would find a suitable spot to make camp and wait expectantly for the heavy machinery and their brothers from the 2nd Construction Brigade. The last 500? Well, they got the sweet gig. With a stroke of my pen, I gave them all a 2-month leave. After 2 months, they were to report back and relieve the next group for their turn to rest. The Baotao Guard had barely set up their tents on the opposite bank for 3 days when the 800 veteran road builders, dispatched by Yufu, arrived. 800 professional road workers meeting 1,000 professional soldiers fresh out of their uniforms. The scene was a clash of masters. The old hands, cigarettes dangling from their lips, taught these raw recruits how to handle rails and sleepers, the sight ringing with the clang of their labor. Meanwhile, to the north, a motley fleet of all-nation brand ships was cutting through the waves, bearing down south with imposing momentum. Screech, several heavy equipment transport ships, converted from caisson sand barges, sidled up to the docks of Chungkong Prefecture like iron behemoths. With a clang, heavy steel plates connected their hulls to the stone pier. Then, one by one, the big machines roared to life with a deafening clamor and rolled ashore. And what treasures had arrived this time? 2 sputtering, black smoke-belching tractors, a loader capable of leveling a small hill, a vibratory road roller that made the ground tremble as it moved, and 2 excavators heavily modified into rock drills. The pneumatic picks at the ends of their mechanical arms glinted menacingly, a nightmare for any rock. Of course, they came with 2 large buckets. Pop off the pick, slap on the bucket, and it was an excavator again. 1 machine, 2 uses. Tell me that's not slick. But that wasn't all. There were plenty more big toys they didn't bother to unload. For tractors, 2 excavators, 2 loaders, and another road roller all stayed put on the ships. The fleet merely took on a hasty resupply of fresh meat and vegetables. Before they could even finish a cup of hot tea, the steam whistle blared, and they continued their urgent journey south. The remaining treasures were destined for the 2nd Construction Brigade and the massive quarry in Panjshir Prefecture. Besides this self-propelled heavy equipment, there was a heap of inanimate iron lumps. A steam-powered table saw hummed, slicing through stone bricks as if they were tofu. A steam-driven air compressor huffed and puffed, supplying endless power to the pneumatic picks and hammers. Add to that countless steel drills and crowbars, and it looked like they were planning to dismantle a mountain. Oh, and a dozen master craftsmen from the capital had come along. These were men who knew stone so intimately they could have been its brother, and their specific task was to supervise the quarry. After all, only they knew exactly what kind of stone the bigwigs in the capital desired. This formidable fleet was practically a mobile logistics base. In addition to the equipment, it carried tons of auxiliary materials and tools, the dynamite and fuses Yufu desperately needed, the steel rails awaited by 2 railway lines, and mountains of railway construction tools and parts. The rest was a massive shipment of steel rebar and cement, for which several construction sites were crying out. As for who was burning through this stuff the most right now? 3 places. The Chitai Line, a mountain-piercing railway that had to rip open the belly of a mountain range. The capital city in the south, which was in a constant state of massive construction. And that insane project in the southwest, the Cross-Sea Bridge. All 3 were bottomless pits, devouring steel and cement. A few more days passed as these supplies were clanged and banged into place. Finally, the 2 trains I had borrowed from Dali were delivered to the Tuai Prefecture docks. The locomotives were old veterans retired from the mines. Though battle-scarred, their hearts were still strong. The carriages and frames, however, were brand new. They had been churned out like dumplings on the production line, originally intended as a stockpile of spare parts. Who would have thought that before the parts were ever needed, they'd have enough to assemble 2 new trains? The ring line back in the capital was currently being served by a single, lonely train, a heartbreaking waste of capacity. So, one of these trains was sent over to supplement it. With 2 trains running in opposite directions, the efficiency of supplying the capital would instantly double. The other train was dispatched directly to the Tangpan Line project. This was a lesson our Han tribe had learned through blood and tears. Back when we built the first Sinway line, it was a miserable affair. As the railway extended, the rails and sleepers had to be hauled by man and ox. Dozens of strong men, grunting and heaving, would carry a single rail, their faces turning purple with effort. They couldn't move more than a few in a single day. We learned our lesson. Now, we lay down a few hundred meters of track at the starting point and get a train on it immediately. All the materials needed for the next phase are loaded onto the train. Wherever the construction crew goes, the train follows. It's a mobile supply station, completely eliminating our transportation worries. So this time, I had the train moved over before a single shadow of the railway was even cast. It's the old principle, move the supplies before the troops. While the Han tribe's various construction sites were bustling with fiery enthusiasm, Ying, the banner commander of the Jinwu Guard, received my orders. He led 200 of his elite guards in a grand procession to Tuahai Prefecture. Traveling with them were Qiao Yin and an elder from the Qiao clan, along with several young adults who knew the clan's internal affairs inside and out. The Shu had already prepared a fleet of 10 ships of various sizes for them in Tuahai Prefecture, forming an impressive trade convoy. The cargo holds of the 4 3-masted ships were stuffed with a dazzling array of goods, from food to daily necessities. Everything imaginable. This voyage had a single purpose: to befriend the tribes we had never met and trade our treasures for their people. Pristine white salt, smooth ceramics, gleaming iron pots and axes, sharp kitchen knives and hatchets, books, calendars, ink, paper, brushes, bolts of cloth, and sewing needles. Anything one could possibly use in daily life. Even things the Qiao people had never seen before. Ying, with a wave of his hand, had it all brought aboard. Even if this voyage didn't bring back many people, we had to spread the name of our Han tribe far and wide, like scattering seeds. In the winter of the 2nd year of the Deming era, mid-December, after a full month of preparations, Ying finally led the fleet to set sail. The fleet departed from Tuahai Prefecture, navigating up the murky currents of the Luyang River. They reached a 3-way river fork, where our people had already erected wooden channel markers and stone landmark towers. They were simple, but clear at a glance. The 10 sailing ships formed a single file column, executed a neat turn, and entered the waterway leading to Honghu Lake. After hugging the shore for another 3 days, the view suddenly opened up. A vast lake, stretching beyond the horizon, appeared before them like an immense sapphire set into the earth. Honghu, the vast lake. They had arrived. Ying immediately gave the order. Change formation. The 4 deep draft, 3-masted ships, like steady and reliable elder brothers, remained far out in the deep water to avoid running aground. 4 2-masted ships moved in closer. On board, soldiers of the Jinwu Guard took turns with spyglasses, perched on the 2nd-level decks like hawks, scanning the shoreline for any sign of movement. At the very front were 2 single-masted cutters. They acted as agile hounds, darting back and forth, almost scraping the shore. These small boats had a shallow draft and were nimble. It wouldn't matter even if one ran straight onto a sandy beach. The fleet, now in formation, continued east along the lake's edge. No one expected that before they had held this new formation for even a day, they would spot signs of human life on the shore. It was noon, and the early winter sun hung lazily in the sky, making it the warmest part of the day. In a sparse wood along the lakeshore, a group of primitive people, dressed in ragged clothes and tattered animal hides, were scurrying about, foraging for food. A dozen or so adult men clutched sharpened bamboo spears, warily scanning their surroundings. In their midst, about 10 women were coaxing a few children, as skinny as monkeys, to climb trees, hoping they might pull a squirrel's winter stash from some hollow. Well, his efforts paid off. A small boy with long, flowing hair actually pulled a large handful of something from a dark tree hollow. It was a cavity packed full of large almonds. My heavens! The little squirrel that had toiled all autumn was probably about to cry its eyes out. Its entire life savings, scraped together for a future mate, had just been cleaned out in one go by a wild child. The kid in the tree shouted with excitement. The women below quickly gathered, two of them stretching out a worn animal hide. Seeing this, the child began to scoop out the almonds handful by handful. The scene was a perfect replica of the Han tribe a dozen years ago. Back then, the entire tribe didn't have a single decent basket. The women would also use animal hides to carry what they gathered. For us, however, this was fantastic news. The poorer and more primitive they were, the easier our trade would be. The lookouts on the ships had long since locked onto them with their spyglasses. The single-masted cutter closest to the shore, without a word, turned its bow and shot towards the group like an arrow loosed from its string. On the shore, the men with the bamboo spears paid no attention to the lake. In their minds, danger came only from the land. Besides fish, what enemy could possibly leap out of the water? Instead, it was a teenager who had been staring at the water hoping to spear a fish, who first spotted the uninvited guest. What was that? A small boat, yet in the boy's eyes, it was a miracle. It needed no one to row it. Propelled by a single white wing, it flew across the water's surface. Standing on the boat were several strangely dressed people. They were wrapped in thick cotton clothes, their hair tied up or covered by hats, and they wore leather boots on their feet. Bundled up so completely, they looked 100 times warmer than he felt in his own drafty animal hide. Who were these people? Why were they coming straight for them? The boy's mind buzzed. He reacted in an instant, sucking in a deep breath and screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice raw, warning his clansmen who had their backs to the lake. Chief, there are people on the water. Chief, strange people are coming from the water. At the sound, the crowd whirled, their eyes glued to the water's surface. On the gray, misty river, several boats of varying sizes were cutting through the water like a school of silent, monstrous fish. The smallest of them was turning its bow, making a beeline straight for them. The young chief's expression hardened, and a sharp command exploded from his throat. Quick! Everyone down from the trees. Drop the food. Women, take the children and get back to the village. Men, fall back with me. Stay sharp and don't get caught. Chief, the teenager who had first spotted the boats couldn't help but ask, are they hostile? A cold sneer twisted the young chief's lips, and he spat without hesitation. Of course they are. You think this is a gift from the heavens? In this God's forsaken weather, in the dead of winter, we're about to starve to death ourselves. Any tribe with the leisure to be sailing about can't be good news. I reckon they're here to steal our food. The words steal our food were like a basin of ice water poured over everyone's heads. The crowd instantly bristled, their muscles tensing with alarm. Winter food was their lifeline. On the shore, the group was in a panic, scrambling to mount a desperate defense. They could never have imagined that the people on the boat were, in fact, here to offer them warmth. It was just that this warmth was a bit too hot to handle. It had to be paid for with their own lives. The small boat scraped ashore, but the soldiers and crew aboard remained perfectly still. Not a single one rushed to jump off. Before understanding the situation, a rash landing was no different from courting disaster. Fortunately, in this regard, the Han tribe were old hands. Soon, a junior officer of the Jinwu Guard, carrying a pile of meeting gifts, jumped ashore alone with a confident swagger. These Jinwu Guards might be a bit green when it comes to a real, pitched battle, but when it came to winning over strangers, each one was a shrewd operator, with guts of steel. After all, their primary business was never fighting on the battlefield, but espionage. This junior officer's name was Shi Quan, and the things he carried were hardly precious. A military greatcoat of brilliant green, a string of smoked, golden-brown rabbit sausages, and half a bag of dark, roasted potatoes. The real currency was the usual valuable commodities, snow-white salt, gleaming ironware, and various pots and bowls for holding water and food. These were treasures no one could do without. Shi Quan stepped onto the crunching, frozen mud. Though his hands were full, his sharp eyes scanned the area like searchlights. In just those few glances, he had already gathered a wealth of intelligence. This tribe is small. Looks like they're short on food, too. Even the children have to come out and forage in this cold. They're wrapped in tattered animal hides, shivering in the wind. The weapons in their hands are crudely sharpened bamboo spears. Not even a decent bow in sight. The little abacus in Shi Quan's mind clattered away. Whether he took them down by force or played a clever game to lure the entire tribe away, neither seemed particularly difficult. His mind raced, formulating a strategy, but his feet didn't stop. He walked straight towards the woods where the men were hiding, alone and completely out in the open. When he was less than 10 meters away, the small tribe's chief finally lost his nerve and roared at the top of his lungs. "Hey, stop. Stay right there. Don't move. Who are you? What do you want? Don't come any closer. One more step and we'll kill you." As the young chief yelled, he brandished his bamboo spear, striking what he thought was a menacing pose. Unfortunately, his faintly trembling legs betrayed his inner nervousness. Shi Quan was sharp. Though he couldn't understand the strange tongue, he understood the posture. They were telling him to halt. He immediately stopped, dropped the items in his hands to the ground with a thud, then picked one up. Grinning at the chief, he began to gesture. "Friend, don't be alarmed. We, the Han tribe, are good people." He picked up the military greatcoat and held it against himself. "Look, for wearing. It's warm." With that, he grabbed a sausage and a potato and took a big bite out of each, chewing with relish. "And this, for eating. Meat. This, also for eating." He carefully placed the bitten food on the spread-out greatcoat, then pulled a small cloth pouch from his tunic. He opened it like a treasure, revealing the snow-white salt crystals inside. "Friend, we've come to trade. This salt. Also for eating. We have pots, we have bowls. If you want them, you can come to the boat to talk." He finished his one-sided speech, not caring whether they understood a word. Leaving everything on the ground, he turned and slowly backed away towards the boat, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Expecting this group to understand him? A pipe dream. This tribe was too small, and the fewer people, the more timid they were. They would never be foolish enough to invite a stranger back to their own camp. It was laughable. Their own pots were nearly empty. What spare food could they possibly have to entertain a guest? So, Shi Quan chose to retreat first and leave the bait. As long as these people weren't fools, they would be drawn by the scent. And sure enough, as the group on the shore watched Shi Quan retreat to the river, they breathed a collective sigh of relief. Then, like thieves, they cautiously crept forward and surrounded the goods. A dozen men with bamboo spears formed a wary circle around the pile of gifts on the ground, while a few others kept their eyes glued to the sailboat by the river, terrified it might suddenly move. What is this stuff? It looks like food." One man picked up a sausage and sniffed it. Hiss! An intense, overpowering aroma of smoked meat and salt shot up his nose, making his mouth water so much he nearly drooled on the spot. "Gods, it smells amazing. It's meat. Chief, why would that man give us meat?" Another man picked up a potato. He stared at the bite mark Shi Quan had left before taking a bite himself. Dry and starchy. The roasted potato was long cold and had no seasoning, so it didn't taste like much. But potatoes had one great advantage. They were filling. Packed with starch, a single bite felt like dropping a stone into an empty stomach. After just one bite, the man's rumbling stomach felt a long-lost sense of satisfaction. His eyes lit up, and he exclaimed in pleasant surprise, "Chief, this is food too. It fills the belly. Tastes all right. Seems it was cooked over a fire." But the young chief's attention was now completely captivated by the green military greatcoat. He lifted it in his hands. It was heavy, substantial. The garment was thick, but it wasn't animal hide. It felt puffy to the touch, as if it had several layers. The fabric of the outermost layer had an incredibly fine weave. It was clearly nothing that grew in nature. And the craftsmanship? Well, he couldn't make heads or tails of it. A fur-lined collar, a double row of buttons, a vent in the back, and even a belt at the waist. These people, they really knew how to dress. No, this was beyond just knowing how to dress. This was a matter of style. The young chief imitated Shi Quan's earlier gesture, shrugging the coat on. He picked up the leather belt, and, after a moment of fiddling, quickly figured out how to use it, cinching it at his waist. Whoosh! A wave of warmth instantly enveloped his upper body. The biting wind that had made him shiver just moments before seemed to be completely shut out. Only his two bare legs, still trembling in the cold, looked particularly desolate. The young chief's face was a mask of gravity and confusion. A coat that was handsome, practical, and unbelievably warm. Plant roots that could be eaten as a staple. And dried meat cured by some special method. These were all treasures. Why would that man just give these things to them for free? Chief, what was that man up to? Why give us so many good things for no reason? Chief, look. There's a small bowl here too. It's beautiful. It has flowers and fish painted on it. And this bag has salt in it. Chief, you have to taste it. How is there salt as white as snow? And, and it has a strange fragrance I can't describe. The young chief's gaze swept quickly over the items in his tribesman's hands. A small cloth pouch filled with white salt. A clean, smooth porcelain bowl, with several lifelike little fish painted on its side. His mind spun, connecting the clues. This tribe must have a large population. They know how to make bowls fit for gods and salt whiter than snow. Most importantly, at this time of year, not only do they not lack food, they have enough to give away to others. And that massive boat that can sail on the water. There was only one conclusion. This was a tribe more powerful than they could possibly imagine. That raised the question. What did such a powerful tribe want in their desolate, God-forsaken corner of the world? Chief, an older tribesman suddenly spoke up. Could they be here to trade with us? The young chief froze, then frowned. Trade? With us? But they're so rich, they have everything. And us? We can't even fill our own stomachs. What could we possibly trade with them? What do we have that they could possibly want? Gods above. I've got it. The words had barely left his mouth when the young chief himself was stunned. Then, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. That's right. We have nothing, and they're rolling in wealth. What could we trade? The only thing we have is people. At this thought, he glanced at the tribesmen around him, and a complex smile bloomed on his face. If it's a trade, then shall we? Go ask the price. At the mere suggestion of going, everyone grew excited. What little fear they had felt was washed away by a tide of curiosity and desire. The young chief took a few of his braver men, drew a deep breath, and walked to the edge of the shore. He studied the boat carefully, and only now did he get a clear look at its occupants. It was an incredible sight. They were all strong young men, every one of them with his hair tied up high, dressed in thick cotton clothes and trousers, with gleaming leather boots on their feet. How in the world are these people so rich? The young chief grumbled with a twinge of envy in his heart. He cleared his throat and called out to Shi Quan on the boat. Hey, are you here to trade? What do you want for the things you left? The language was different, but the meaning was clear. The moment Shi Quan saw their eager expressions, he knew the fish had taken the bait. He immediately had a plank laid to the shore, then called his soldiers to begin unloading all sorts of merchandise. They didn't go far, setting up a makeshift market right there on the riverbank. Pots and pans of all sizes, galvanized iron buckets that shone like silver, pitch-black iron woks and ladles, barrel after barrel of snow-white salt, and whole sheepskins, thick woolen felts. And, of course, there were tools. Shovels, for instance, which this tribe probably had no use for. They didn't farm or dig pits. But knives were definitely hard currency. A machete, its blade glinting, could clear a path in the woods, chop wood, and, in a pinch, be used as a weapon. An entrenching tool could be used as an axe, a shovel, or to dig up edible roots, a truly all-purpose marvel. And a flint and steel set, strike them together, and sparks would fly. It was a world away from drilling wood for fire. Seeing so many people disembark from the boat, the small tribe's budding courage almost shriveled up again. But when they saw that the newcomers were only arranging their goods on the shore with no signs of aggression, the chief and two of his men summoned their nerve and approached. Seeing them come closer, Shi Quan twisted the lid off a wooden barrel. With a scrape of wood on wood, the lid came free. A barrel full of snow-white salt, blindingly bright under the gloomy sky, instantly made the three onlookers freeze in their tracks. This, white salt. Shi Quan pointed to the barrel, then held up one finger and pointed back towards the children of the tribe. One child, for a bowl this big. Take it away. He picked up a machete and, with a casual swing, chopped at a nearby wrist-thick shrub. And this, a machete. Made of steel. See for yourselves, is it sharp? Crack. The shrub snapped in two, the cut as smooth as a mirror. The young chief and the two tribesmen behind him stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. They all gasped in unison. This was the weapon of a god. Gods above. This thing was too sharp. It was a divine tool that could slice through iron as if it were clay. And all these pots and bowls. Shi Quan's voice boomed as he gestured expansively, like a traveling salesman hawking his wares. This one, for drinking water and eating. This one, for stewing meat and making soup. This one, an iron bucket for fetching water. And this big iron wok, if your tribe isn't too large, this one pot is enough to cook for everyone. He chattered on enthusiastically, but the primitive people across from him just stared with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The words washed over them, utterly meaningless. But it didn't matter. Language might be a barrier, but their eyes worked just fine. After Shi Quan had demonstrated all his wares with a flurry of gestures, the group understood in an instant. They immediately huddled together, launching into a frantic debate, chattering away in their own tongue. A stout man clutched the machete, his eyes gleaming. "Chief, this thing called a knife is incredible. With this, even the fiercest wild boar couldn't withstand a single blow from me." "Are you a fool?" The young chief shot him a sideways glance and scolded. "With something so short, you'd have to get close enough for the beast to gut you. Are you eager to die?" Someone else immediately chimed in. "Exactly. Our bamboo spears are the way to go. They're long enough to run a beast through from a safe distance. It's a poor trade to give your life for a mouthful of meat." The stout man, who had been admiring the machete just moments before, was taken aback. He reluctantly put it down, his eyes wandering to other things. At that moment, Shi Quan was conducting a demonstration of the day's featured product, the flint and steel. He grabbed a handful of dry grass and tinder, clenching it in his fist. Clang, clang. He struck the flint sharply against the steel twice. A few sparks shot out, landing precisely on the dry grass. A wisp of blue smoke curled upwards, followed by a whoosh as a bright flame leaped to life. His team members swiftly gathered dry firewood and built a small pyre. The fire was soon roaring. Clang. A few large stones were hauled from the lakeshore and arranged around the fire. The dark iron wok was placed steadily on top. Someone brought a bucket of water from the lake and poured it into the wok with a splash. Then, sliced cured sausages and peeled potato chunks were tossed in. Another team member was washing rice by the lake, the bamboo basket rising and falling, the white grains tumbling in the water. Once clean, it too was poured into the pot. Before long, the pot was bubbling merrily, and an indescribable, savory aroma of meat congee aggressively invaded everyone's nostrils. The group of primitive people across from them watched, their eyes nearly popping out of their heads. They craned their necks, swallowing hard, their gulps clearly audible. "Chief," someone couldn't resist whispering, "that thing on the fire is amazing. It can hold water and cook meat. It's so much better than eating roasted meat every day. The best part is, we could drink hot water." "Drink hot water? With what? Do you have one of their bowls?" The chief retorted irritably. "If we trade for a pot, don't we have to trade for bowls too? Do you have anything to trade?" After rebuking his tribesmen, the young chief took a deep breath and walked up to Shi Quan. He had already made up his mind. Food. Only a fool would trade for food. As long as you were alive, you could always find something to eat. But this mysterious tribe from the water, who knew when they would ever be seen again? He had to take this opportunity to trade for the treasures his tribe desperately needed, but could never produce themselves. "I want this iron pot, a spoon, a machete, and this bowl." He pointed at the items on the ground, his voice crisp and decisive. "Just these. What's the price?" The young chief returned to his people, cleared his throat, and announced loudly, "A tribe has come from the great lake of the Sunset Lands. They want to trade with us. But they will only trade for people." A commotion immediately rippled through the crowd. The chief quickly added, "Don't be afraid if you're chosen. They have everything. Their food is better than ours, you see. If you go with them, you definitely won't starve." At these words, some of the fear in the people's eyes subsided. To be traded away? If it was to a tribe of savage cannibals, they might as well just dash their own brains out right now. But what if? What if it was to a godlike tribe where everyone ate meat at every meal and had proper clothes to wear? Many secretly raised their eyes and looked towards the group of strangely but warmly dressed Han tribe people by the lake. Their gazes eventually became glued to the large iron pot that was bubbling with a fragrant steam. The smell was enough to steal a person's soul. And that enormous, unfamiliar boat on the lake, it was clearly a magical vessel that could travel on water. Even the slowest person understood. This tribe was unimaginably powerful. That they didn't lack for food or clothing was an undeniable fact. Among the crowd, some began to have ideas. They even shuffled forward a bit, a flicker of hope in their hearts that they might be chosen by the chief. The feeling of starvation was too awful. That feeling of being too hungry to sleep, your stomach churning with acid. Anyone who could stand it was welcome to it. However, the young chief already had a plan. His gaze fell precisely on the young girls and teenagers in the tribe. According to custom, these girls would have to be married off to other tribes when they grew up anyway, to prevent the birth of weak children. Instead of wasting food to raise them, why not trade them now? Consider it an early marriage. You, and you lot, come here. The chief's finger darted through the crowd, and a dozen or so young girls were selected. A few suppressed cries of joy and many more sighs of regret could be heard from the crowd. How wonderful it would be to be taken away by that tribe of such impossible wealth. Friend, seeing the deal was done, Shi Quan sidled up with a grin. He picked up the flint and steel, which was no bigger than his palm, and shook it. You have a machete now, so you can chop a lot of firewood. But what if your fire goes out? This flint and steel can make a fire anytime, anywhere. Very convenient. Want one? It's cheap, just 2 people. The young chief's eyes went wide. This little piece of iron was more expensive than the big iron pot and the machete combined. It cost 2 people? But Shi Quan, without batting an eye, continued his earnest pitch. This is the source of fire, brother. You know how important fire is, don't you? With this, you hold a flame that need never go out. Don't you think it's worth 2 people? Men, look alive, move it. Get some of those buckets off the ship and haul them over. Find a sturdy plank to throw on top. And just like that, you've got a table. 1 bowl of congee and 1 spoon per person. Anyone without a seat waits their turn. Get them in a line to eat. And remember, these people are starving. Go easy on the portions, 1 bowl each. If anyone dares to give more and they eat themselves sick, I'll have their hide. Sir, Shi Quan's soldiers roared their assent, their movements a blur of practiced efficiency. Several buckets were thumped into place to serve as table legs, and a wooden plank was slapped on top. A makeshift dining table was born. A scalding ceramic bowl was set on the board with a thud, a rich aroma of rice billowing out with the steam. Who would dare pick that up with their bare hands? You'd have to want to scorch your own fingers. Inside the tent, the ground was tamped solid by the soles of their boots in no time. With a few quick scrapes, several soldiers brandishing shovels dug 2 crude drainage ditches beside the tent. The used bathwater was poured in with a splash and flowed swiftly away down the channels. And while all this bustling activity was going on, a few pairs of eyes were peeking stealthily from a small grove of trees 100 meters away. The one in the lead was none other than the chief of the small tribe who had previously led his people away in such a heroic departure. It seemed he hadn't gone far at all. Men, look alive, get moving. Get a few of those buckets off the ship for me. Then find a sturdy board, throw it on top, and just like that, you have a table, see? 1 bowl of congee per person, 1 spoon. Those without a place to sit will have to wait their turn. Tell them to line up and eat. Remember, these people are starving. Be careful, just 1 bowl per person. If anyone dares to give more and it makes them sick, I'll hold them personally responsible. Sir, Shi Quan's soldiers roared in agreement, their movements a blur of efficiency. A few buckets were thumped into place as table legs, a wooden board was slapped on top, and a brand new dining table was born. A piping hot ceramic bowl was placed on the board with a thud, the rich aroma of rice billowing out with clouds of steam. Who would dare to pick that up with their bare hands? That would be asking for a fight with your own fingers. Inside the tent, the ground was quickly tamped solid by the soles of their boots. Several soldiers, brandishing shovels, dug 2 crude drainage ditches on the side of the tent with a few swift scrapes. The used bathwater was poured in with a splash and flowed away down the channel. And while all this was going on, in a small grove of trees about 100 meters away, several pairs of eyes were watching in secret. The leader was none other than the chief of the small tribe who had heroically led his people away earlier. He hadn't gone far at all, it seemed. The newly arrived girls were mimicking the rough men of the Jinwu Guard, learning how to steam rice. And to their credit, they were doing a respectable job. The children were assigned the most arduous task, tending the fire. Their little faces glowed red in the firelight, and they were having the time of their lives. On the other side, a few of the bolder girls had already started chopping vegetables. Although their movements were clumsy, their earnest expressions were quite endearing. With a crisp crunch, the sour and refreshing pickled cabbage was taken out of the jar and cut into sections. The round potatoes rumbled across the cutting board before being chopped into chunks. With a whoosh, the large iron wok was heated until it was scorching hot. A spoonful of oil was poured in with a sizzle and instantly atomized. The fragrance of star anise and dried chili peppers seemed to grow legs, zipping straight into their noses. Next, the thinly sliced cured meat, transparent as a cicada's wing, was tossed into the wok. The fatty parts quickly turned translucent in the high heat, sizzling and rendering their fat. Finally, with a great heave, the pickled cabbage, potatoes, vermicelli, and the sun-dried long beans were all dumped in. Water was added, salt was sprinkled, The lid was put on, and it all began to simmer and stew. Heavens above! A heaping pot of hearty food, the aroma of meat, vegetables, and spices all mixed together. That overpowering fragrance was like a siren's call, drifting far, far away. The small clay pot next to it was not to be outdone. Wisps of the pure fragrance of rice were desperately squeezing out from the cracks in the lid. Forget the girls who had just had meat congee a few hours ago. Smelling this heavenly scent, their mouths were watering enough to form a river. Although it was just a hodgepodge stew, this was something they had never even seen before, let alone eaten. If even their own people were so tantalized, then what of the spies hiding in the woods not far away, craning their necks to look in this direction? What was even more outrageous was that not only did the Han tribe have rice and vegetables, but that rascal Shi Quan had also ordered someone to brew a large pot of mung bean soup, calling it a little something to fill in the cracks. Grumble, grumble. A series of earth-shattering stomach growls echoed from the nearby woods, a discordant duet. Finally, someone couldn't hold it in any longer. I say, those people don't look so bad, do they? Why do we have to hide here? Weren't we just trading with them this morning? If we go over and take a look, it should be fine, right? Yeah. Look at all the food they have, piled up like a small mountain. Let's just go see what they're eating. Maybe we can even pick up a trick or two. Right. Didn't the chief trade for 2 pots? We don't even know how to use them yet. We're going to learn how to cook. Yes, just to learn how to cook. Don't you think that's a good reason? With this excuse, it was as if they had found a lifeline. Their eyes lit up instantly. Their legs, as if with a mind of their own, began to move towards Shi Quan's camp. On the eastern shore of Honghu Lake, in the temporary camp, dinner was already on the table. The soldiers, using their old trick, had once again set up a simple long table with a few buckets and a wooden board. Everyone crowded around it. Several large ceramic basins were filled with steaming hot hodgepodge stew, overflowing with chunks of meat, potatoes, vermicelli, and pickled cabbage. Around the table sat the women and children, each with a bowl of white rice piled high like a small mountain in front of them. These people had no idea how to use chopsticks. The soldiers simply took a large ladle and clanged 2 large spoonfuls of stew into each of their bowls, saving them the trouble of fumbling around and spilling food all over the table. This time, everyone had a pair of chopsticks. Although picking up food was out of the question, using the chopsticks as shovels to move rice into their mouths was no problem. Even the little kids were learning to do it with some semblance of skill. Eat slowly, don't choke. There's plenty more in the pot. If you're not full, come get more. From now on, with our Han tribe, I guarantee you'll eat this well every meal. But I'll say this now, you're not to leave a single grain of rice in your bowl. If you can't finish it, don't take so much. Wasting food is a terrible sin. Dozens of people were gathered together, slurping down their food. The scene was quite a spectacle. Shi Quan, holding a bowl, walked back and forth between the 2 tables like a supervisor, eating as he went, and constantly chattering to the new women and children about the glorious deeds of the Han tribe. Although they couldn't understand a word, that wasn't important. The important thing was to create an atmosphere. Can't understand? That's fine. The more you listen, the more you'll learn. Just then, the spies finally shuffled over. Halt! Several Jinwu Guard soldiers on watch immediately spotted them. Their gazes were like lightning, their hands already on the hilts of their swords. Junior Officer Shi, the group from this morning is back. A soldier quickly stepped forward and reported in a low voice. Shi Quan glanced at the embarrassed-looking group and waved his hand dismissively. Let them come. Sir. In less than half a minute, the group was invited into the camp. They stared straight at the women who were engrossed in their food, drool practically dripping from the corners of their mouths. Their intestines were green with regret. Gods above, if they had known the treatment was this good, they should have been crying and begging to be traded this morning. Sure, the master swindler, holding his rice bowl, strolled over with a confident gait, his mouth still full. With a gulp, he swallowed the food in his mouth and then asked with a grin, My friends, what brings you here so late at night instead of sleeping? We're just looking. We traded for 2 pots this afternoon, and we don't know how to use them. We're just looking. What is this you're eating? It smells so good. Yes. We just don't know how to use those things, so we came to learn. Yes, to learn how you cook. The men were incoherent, pointing at the bowl in Shi Quan's hand one moment, and then at the large iron pot still steaming in the distance the next. Halfway through their explanation, grumble. Their stomachs, once again, inconveniently sang a song of emptiness. The sound was like thunder. It was so embarrassing they wanted the ground to swallow them whole. Shi Quan almost burst out laughing. Although he couldn't understand what these guys were babbling about, seeing them eyeing the pot and the bowls while swallowing their saliva, wasn't the meaning obvious? They were hungry. They wanted to eat but were too embarrassed to ask, so they had to put on a show and make up excuses. Thinking of this, Shi Quan let out a snort of laughter. This was the turning point he'd been waiting for. Ha ha, brothers, your stomachs are growling like that, and you're still putting on an act with me. Hungry, are you? Can't get enough to eat back at your own place. He waved his hand with the magnanimity of a wealthy landowner. Men, get these friends a bowl of rice each, and pile the food on top until it's overflowing. Sir, the soldiers moved with lightning speed. They brought over a large wooden basin, slammed it on the ground with a clang, and that was the table. Come, sit down. Don't be shy. Make yourselves at home. Shi Quan greeted them enthusiastically. As soon as they sat down cross-legged, someone was already there with several large bowls. The bowls were filled with white rice, and on top of the rice was a heaping pile of oily meat and vegetables. The pile was so high it was hard to stick a pair of chopsticks in straight. After giving them chopsticks, Shi Quan personally demonstrated, eat. Do as I do. Pick up the bowl and shovel it into your mouth. Looking at the feast in front of them, the men could no longer hold back. Their saliva flowed freely. They exchanged glances, and their eyes all said the same thing. He gave it to us willingly. I didn't ask for it. It would be a waste not to eat it. Let's go. The next second, the men, imitating Shi Quan, picked up their bowls and went into a frenzy. It was truly a whirlwind of wolfish gobbling. Accidentally, a piece of potato fell from the rice onto the ground. One of the men, without even thinking, picked it up, didn't even bother to blow on it, and stuffed it directly into his mouth. Hungry. They were truly starving. Shi Quan finished his own meal in a few quick bites, had someone get him a bowl of mung bean soup, and took a leisurely sip before putting down the bowl. He looked at the men who were still hard at work and asked with a grin, "My friends, is the food of the Han tribe delicious?" The men's mouths were stuffed full, so they could only nod vigorously. Seeing this, Shi Quan struck while the iron was hot and began his pyramid scheme-style speech. He spoke and gestured with his hands, afraid that these simple fellows wouldn't understand. Do you want to eat like this every day? 3 meals a day, all you can eat. After gesturing back and forth several times, finally, a slightly brighter teenager's eyes widened. He asked with an incredulous look on his face, "Really? Can we really eat like this every day? 3 meals a day." Shi Quan nodded heavily, a benevolent smile on his face that said, "Believe in me and you shall be saved." Of course, another man couldn't help but ask, Then what do we need to trade for it?" But Shi Quan shook his head, his expression suddenly becoming profound and mysterious. "You can't trade things for food. Even with people, you can't trade for it. There is only one way to eat like this every day. Join our Han tribe." He pointed to the women and children eating not far away. "See them? They also joined us from other tribes, and now they can eat their fill every day." Hearing this, the men hesitated, even the chewing in their mouths slowed. After a long silence, someone finally spoke. If we can really eat our fill every day, we are willing to join you. But our chief, he will definitely not agree. He will not trade us for things." Shi Quan suddenly smiled, like a fox in the hen house. "That's easy. If he doesn't agree, it means he doesn't want you to have a good life. And what is someone who doesn't want you to have a good life? An enemy. What do we do with enemies? Get rid of him. Then bring all your tribe's people and come join our Han tribe. By then, all of you will be able to live a good life with enough to eat and wear, and you will never have to go hungry or cold again." Shi Quan's words landed like a thunderclap, striking the men dumb. They were dumbfounded, their mouths gaping wide enough to fit an egg. They couldn't say a word. Just, for this, they had to kill someone? Heavens! The chief was actually quite good to them. Although they were not well fed, the chief himself didn't eat much either. No one had ever complained. Now, just to be able to eat their fill in the future, they had to kill the chief? How was this any different from being a beast? Unthinkable. As if they hadn't understood Shi Quan's words, the men silently lowered their heads and continued to shovel rice into their mouths, but their speed was noticeably slower. Shi Quan saw their reaction and knew in his heart that this matter could not be rushed. Since the incitement to mutiny had failed, he pivoted to Plan B. "If you are not willing to get rid of the chief, that's also easy. Our ship will leave in 3 days, at night. At that time, if you want to come with us, just sneak over under the cover of darkness and get on board. We will leave by water, without anyone knowing. Your chief won't be able to find you even if he tries. By the way, if you have women and children or close brothers and sisters, you can tell them this news and come together. You don't need to bring anything. We have everything here. We can take as many people as you bring. My friends, think about it carefully. As soon as these words were spoken, the men's hearts skipped a beat. They couldn't bring themselves to kill the chief. But, sneaking away on their own, that was a different matter. We haven't done anything wrong to the chief. We just want to pursue a better life. There's nothing wrong with that, right? What's more, their own sisters and children were now with the Han tribe. If they also joined, wouldn't that be a family reunion? The more they thought about it, the more excited they became, and the more they felt that this idea was a work of genius. They exchanged glances and saw in each other's eyes a light called hope. The hope of living a good life, eating their fill at every meal, and having warm clothes to wear in winter. Meanwhile, while these men were being swayed by Shi Quan's words at the other end of the woods, in the camp of the small tribe, the young chief was having dinner with his tribespeople. They had learned from the Han tribe and set up the newly traded iron pot on a few stones, with a fire burning underneath. Water was added to the pot, along with some hard-dried meat and some unnamed nuts. A pot of nut and dried meat soup was thus born. Unfortunately, these people had no idea that they needed to add salt to their cooking, and there was not a single grain of rice or a single vegetable in the pot. The taste was simply indescribable. The real problem was, there was so little meat. Before, everyone would get a whole piece of dried meat. Now, they had learned to cut the meat into small pieces and cook it in a soup, and the result was a pot of clear, watery broth. The little bits of meat, all added together, seemed to be less than what they used to get. Many people held their bowls and looked at the few pathetic pieces of meat in the pot, and their hearts were filled with resentment for the new iron pot. Just then, the spies who had been sent out returned. Each of them had a round belly and a greasy mouth, and they would let out a satisfied burp from time to time. Their contented appearance was in stark contrast to the hungry tribespeople around them. "Did you eat outside?" the chief asked with a frown. The men were honest, but they twisted the truth a little. "Chief, we want to see how the tribe from the water cooks. We didn't expect them to be so nice. They even gave each of us a portion. Gods, Chief, their food is so fragrant." The people who had stayed in the tribe, including the chief, were all stunned. They looked at them in confusion. They gave you food?" "Yes, Chief. I don't know what it's called. It's white, like the clouds in the sky, and it tastes fragrant and sweet. And there's meat and vegetables, all cooked in that big iron pot." The young chief still found it hard to believe. Is that tribe really that good? They didn't ask you for anything in return, they just gave you food for free? "No, they didn't ask for anything," the men said honestly. That was strange. The chief was puzzled, but the tribespeople next to him were different. They looked down at the strange-tasting thin soup in their bowls, and then thought of the large pot of fragrant meat congee they had seen in the morning. Their stomachs immediately began to rumble in protest. Some of the more astute people's eyes had already started to dart around. Could it be that they could also find an excuse to go monitor them? Since those people were so easy to talk to, maybe they would also give them a bowl of rice. While the young chief was still scratching his head, he summoned the men who had just returned from their free lunch. "Besides stuffing your faces, did you find out when that bunch is finally clearing out?" We did. One of the sharper ones chimed in. "They said in 3 days. After 3 sunrises and sunsets. As soon as it gets dark, they're setting sail." "Oh," the chief stroked his chin, pondering for a moment before giving his order. "Then keep a close eye on them. Don't let them near our territory, and absolutely no wandering around on the shore. And another thing, all the game around here is ours. They are not allowed to hunt. You hear me?" He had barely finished speaking when, with a great stir, dozens of people shot to their feet, their faces flush with a sudden fervor. They shouted at the top of their lungs, "Chief, let us go. It's so cold out. If you keep sending the same few, they'll freeze to death. We can stand watch too." Yeah. "Chief, I've got good eyes. I can spot a rabbit at night. Send me. I guarantee I'll watch them like a hawk." Chief, me too. I want to go too." The scene instantly descended into chaos. The crowd was clamoring, all fighting for the cushy job of spying. To put it bluntly, they just wanted to go and sponge a free meal. The excuse was as absurd as it was pathetic. Their young chief wasn't a fool. He saw right through their little schemes. They'd seen the first few men get a taste of the good life and wanted in on the action themselves. But then, a second thought struck him. This deal wasn't half bad, was it? Every free meal they got from the Han tribe was one less mouth his own tribe had to feed. Why would he stop them from taking advantage of such a sweet deal? Only an idiot would pass that up. So, he cleared his throat and announced with a pretense of seriousness, "Fine, you can all go, but not all at once. You'll go in shifts. A few will go tonight, and at dawn tomorrow, a new shift will take over. Midday, evening, keep rotating. We'll watch them until they're gone." The gears in his head were turning. On one hand, he was letting his people take advantage. On the other, maybe he could use this human wave tactic to annoy the Han tribe into leaving. "I'll send people to eat at your camp every day. I'll eat you out of house and home. Let's see how long you can last." And so, for the next 3 days, a highly dramatic scene unfolded by the lake. The small tribe, with the regularity of a changing of the guard, sent wave after wave of people to monitor Shi Quan and his men. And on Shi Quan's side, he refused no one. "We won't make the first move, but if you show up on our doorstep asking for food, then hospitality is a must." They served meals during the day and even provided a late-night snack. A warm fire, roasted potatoes, roasted sausages. The hospitality was complete. After they were well-fed and warmed, Shi Quan would begin his true work, the subtle planting of ideas. Want to live like this every day? Want to have no worries about food or clothing? In 3 days, at night, our ships will leave. Anyone who wants to come with us, just come straight to the boats then. No one will ever know. This pitch was repeated countless times over 3 days to wave after wave of monitors. The funny thing was, every single one of them guarded this secret jealously. When they returned to their camp, not only did they keep their mouths shut to the chief, they didn't even tell their fellow tribesmen. Each of them believed they were the chosen one, the only lucky soul to be singled out by the Han tribe. In the blink of an eye, it was the evening of the 3rd day. The chief of the small tribe was growing restless. They were supposed to leave today, so why were those 2 ships still sitting in the water as if they'd grown roots? The tents on the shore hadn't been taken down either. What in the world were these people planning? In contrast, the tribesmen who had been won over by Shi Quan were all perfectly calm. They even started comforting their chief. "Chief, don't you worry. Those people seem easy enough to talk to, and they haven't caused any trouble these past few days. They said they'd leave after dark. It's still early. They probably want to have dinner before they set off. Yeah, that's right. You can't make a fire out on the water. They've got to eat on shore before they go." Hearing his tribesmen's reassurances, the chief finally felt a bit more at ease. So what if they didn't leave? Perfect. He'd just keep sending people to mooch off them. He couldn't imagine his few hundred mouths failing to eat them into ruin. Then keep watching them. "Don't come back until their ships have sailed," he commanded with a wave of his hand. "Sir, you can count on us." The few young men whose turn it was to stand watch that night were beaming. Their reply was the loudest of all. They had already given their wives and children a heads up. "Don't sleep too soundly tonight. Wait for me to come get you. We're going to join the Han tribe and live the good life." And the women of the tribe, having witnessed the divine artifacts of the Han tribe, were already overjoyed in their hearts. What's more, their own daughters had been traded away. If they didn't go now, they might never see them again in this lifetime. So, when their husbands proposed defecting, they didn't hesitate for a second. The men whose turn it was to monitor that night, before leaving, exchanged a knowing glance with their wives and children. Then, shouldering their bamboo spears, they marched with a heroic swagger towards the lake. Shi Quan had said it. "Don't bring anything, just yourselves." Night fell, and the stars were dim. But the Han tribe's camp by the lake was as bright as day. Several carbide lamps cast a dazzling glare, illuminating the entire area. Around 9 o'clock, snores began to fill the tribe's camp. The men in charge of monitoring quietly slipped back. Like thieves, they tiptoed to wake their wives and children. "Chill, wrap yourselves in your hides and follow me." At the same time, in the neighboring tent, several other men were doing the exact same thing. They abandoned even the iron pots and buckets they had traded for, hastily stuffing 2 porcelain bowls into their clothes before preparing to flee. But to their surprise, before they could make a move, they heard a rustling sound from next door. "Don't move. There's someone next door," one of the men hissed, holding his wife and child down as he peeked out. "Huh, aren't those the men who went to stand watch tonight? What are they doing back?" "Whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll wait for them to leave." Hunched over, they waited until the neighboring tent was quiet before taking their own wives and children and plunging into the darkness. At the same time, back at the lakeside camp, Shi Quan had already directed the soldiers to dismantle all the tents and load the supplies onto the ships. The 50-odd women and children who had been purchased were also sent aboard the three-masted ship long ago. When the first group of defectors arrived, panting, Shi Quan immediately had them ferried to the large ship by a small boat. Once on board, they were dumbstruck. Gods above, it was huge inside. This thing could probably hold several hundred people, couldn't it? Little did they know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. But shocked as they were, doing this for the first time, their hearts were still pounding with fear. One man grabbed the sailor who was leading them and asked, his voice trembling, When are we leaving? If we don't go soon, what if the chief finds out? The sailor just smiled calmly. What's the hurry? There are more people coming. Besides, even if he does find out, is he going to swim after us? The sailor had barely left when, a dozen minutes later, another group of over 10 people was brought aboard. The two groups, in the ship's hold, stared at each other under the light of the carbide lamps. The situation was, for a moment, intensely awkward. Ha, what a coincidence you're here too. Yeah. My two daughters are here, I couldn't bear to leave them. Ha. The shared awkwardness of being caught in the act of group defection was a novel experience for them all. And so it went. Every 10 to 15 minutes, another 10 or 20 people were brought onto the ship. Those who came first were shocked. Those who came later were even more shocked. Gods above, has the entire tribe relocated here? The truth was not far from what they imagined. The small tribe had a total population of just over 160. Shi Quan had already bought nearly 60 of them, leaving just over 100. And now, that 100-odd people, after being persuaded one by Shi Quan, had all run over, families in tow. Shi Quan walked into the hold, carrying a carbide lamp. He scanned the crowd and asked, Take a look around. See who you recognize. Is anyone missing? The crowd buzzed with whispers and pointing. After a quick count, they came to an astonishing conclusion. One man stepped forward and reported cautiously. Friend, besides our chief and his family, it looks like everyone is here. Shi Quan paused. Well, he thought. Did I just poach an entire tribe? To leave like that just didn't sit right. That pristine salt, those brand new iron pots and buckets, they'd all been paid for with valuable goods. Was he really going to let that solitary chief keep them all? No way. That was too great a loss. Should he send a few men back to retrieve their belongings? And while they were at it, perhaps they could take care of that little chief and abduct his wife and children. Shi Quan stroked his chin, a vicious thought flashing through his mind. But that would be a truly despicable thing to do. He'd already lured away the man's entire tribe. Now he was going to kill him and steal his family? If word of that got out, how could he, Shi Quan, ever show his face in polite society again? Forget it. It's best not to burn every bridge. He finally made up his mind and ordered the man beside him. A few of you go and steal back all the pots, pans, buckets, and salt we sold them. Remember, steal. As for the chief and his family, we'll spare their lives. We'll wait for him at dawn. If he comes to his senses and is willing to bring his family aboard, then all is well. If not, then let him stay and continue to be king of his little mountain. Sir,